They called me a witch long before they ever knew my name, and I learned that night that a name is sometimes safer than silence. I heard it through a half-open window, the kind that never closes all the way no matter how hard you push it, the kind that lets the outside world slip in when you least expect it. The wind was soft, barely moving the curtains, and the house had settled into that deep quiet that only comes late at night, when even memories seem to whisper instead of speak. I was standing alone in the small kitchen, the light above the stove turned off, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold without me noticing. That was when the word reached me, carried on a nervous breath, sharp enough to cut through the calm like a blade. "Stay away from her," a woman's voice said, low but urgent, as if she was afraid the walls themselves might hear her. There was a pause, the kind that hangs heavy with meaning, and then another voice answered, this one laughing, but not with joy. It was the laugh people use when they want to sound brave, when fear is sitting right behind their teeth. "She brings bad luck," that voice replied, trying to make it sound like a joke, trying to make it smaller than it was. But the word lingered in the air, thick and ugly. Witch. They did not say it loud. They did not have to. The fear in it did the shouting for them. I did not move. I did not step away from the window or clear my throat to let them know I was there. I did not even tighten my grip on the cup in my hands, though the porcelain was cold enough to make my fingers ache. I stood very still in the dark, listening to the sound of my own breathing, slow and steady, as if my body already knew this moment would need patience. I did not cry. I did not feel the hot rush of anger people expect when they hear cruel things about themselves. What I felt was older than that. Quieter. A familiar heaviness that settled in my chest like a stone that had been placed there years ago and never removed. I had learned a long time ago that when people fear what they do not understand, they do not ask questions. They make stories instead. They take small moments and stretch them into something ugly. They turn coincidence into proof and silence into guilt. And when those stories are told often enough, they become weapons sharp enough to wound without ever being held. That night, standing alone in the dark with my cold tea in my tired hands, I understood that I had become one of those stories. Not a woman. Not a mother. Not a person with a past and a heart that still ached. Just a warning whispered behind closed doors. I smiled to myself then, a small, tired smile that never reached my eyes. Not because it did not hurt. It did hurt. It hurt in the way only deep things hurt, the way old grief hurts when it is touched by something new. It was the kind of pain that does not scream. It settles. It makes a home in you. It sits quietly and reminds you of every other time you were misunderstood, every other moment when silence felt safer than defending yourself. I had known that pain before. I knew its shape. I knew how long it could stay. If only they knew how ordinary I was, I thought, staring down at the dark surface of the tea, where my reflection barely showed. If only they knew how many mornings I woke up already tired, my bones heavy with years of work and worry. If only they knew how much I had already lost before I ever walked into their lives, how much grief had passed through my hands and left them trembling. There was nothing mysterious about me. Nothing powerful in the way they imagined. I did not control the world. I did not bend fate. I was simply someone who had lived long enough to notice patterns, to feel changes in the air, to recognize when something was about to go wrong because it had gone wrong so many times before. But they did not know that. They did not want to know that. To them, I was just the old woman at the edge of the family, close enough to see but never close enough to belong. I was the one who prayed differently, quietly, without show, my lips moving in words meant more for comfort than for miracles. I was the one who spoke softly, not because I was weak, but because I had learned that loud voices often hide empty hearts. I was the one who noticed things before they happened, not because I had some dark gift, but because pain teaches you to pay attention. When you have lost enough, you learn to listen to the smallest signs, the way the air changes before a storm, the way a room feels before bad news arrives. They did not see any of that. They only saw what frightened them. They only saw the parts of me that did not fit neatly into their understanding of the world. And so they gave me a name that made sense to them, a name that turned their unease into something solid. Witch. A word heavy with blame, easy to whisper, easier to believe. That night, after the voices faded and the quiet returned, I carried my untouched tea to the sink and poured it away. The sound it made as it disappeared down the drain felt louder than it should have, like a goodbye I was not ready to say. I washed the cup slowly, my hands moving on their own, my mind already far away. When I finally went to my room, the house felt different, as if it was holding its breath. I lay down on my bed without turning on the light, staring up at the ceiling, watching shadows move as the wind brushed against the window outside. I knew something was about to change. I could feel it in my body, the same way I used to feel storms coming when I was younger, before the rain ever touched the ground. There was a heaviness in the air, a pressure that made it hard to rest, like the world itself was leaning in, waiting. It felt unkind, not in a loud or violent way, but in a slow, patient way, the kind that wears you down without you noticing at first. I did not know how fast it would come. I did not know that the whispers would soon turn into looks, and the looks into distance, and the distance into something that could no longer be ignored. I did not know how quickly a single word could change the shape of my place in that home. I only knew that once a story like that begins, it does not end quietly. And I did not know, not yet, how loud the silence would be afterward, how heavy it would feel when no one whispered anymore, when fear turned into something else, something far more complicated and far more painful. Lying there in the dark, listening to the steady sound of my own breathing, I closed my eyes and waited, because waiting was something I had always been good at. Before they ever feared me, before the whispers and the careful looks and the silence that followed me from room to room, I was just a mother, nothing more and nothing less. I was a woman who woke up before the sun and went to sleep long after everyone else, a woman whose days were measured not by hours but by what needed to be done next. My hands shook sometimes, not from weakness, but from years of work that never really ended. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, worrying, praying. My heart never learned how to rest because there was always someone who needed something, always a problem that love alone was supposed to fix. I cooked meals that were simple, the kind you learn to make when money is tight and mouths are many. Rice that steamed softly in the pot, bread warm just enough to smell like comfort, soup that carried whatever vegetables I could afford that week. There was nothing fancy about my food, but it was warm, and it was made with care, and that mattered to me. I prayed while I cooked, quietly, without making a show of it. I prayed for my children's safety, for their futures, for strength to get through another day. I prayed for things I never said out loud, fears I did not want to give too much shape to by speaking them. I believed, truly believed, that love could mend what the world kept breaking, that if I loved my family hard enough, patiently enough, somehow it would be enough. My youngest son was the one who stayed closest to my heart. He was quieter than the others, thoughtful in a way that made him seem older than his years. When the evenings grew still and the house finally settled, he used to sit beside me, his shoulder pressed gently against my arm, listening to my stories as if they were secrets meant only for him. I told him about my childhood, about his father, about mistakes I had made and lessons I had learned the hard way. He listened without interrupting, his eyes focused, his mind open. In those moments, I felt seen in a way that is rare, even within families. When he told me he was getting married, I smiled and told him I was happy. And I was. I truly was. A mother wants her child to build a life of his own, to find someone who will walk beside him when she no longer can. Still, happiness does not erase fear. It only sits beside it. I worried quietly, the way mothers do, wondering if he would still need me, if there would be room for me in the life he was creating. His wife entered our lives like a bright flame. She was beautiful in a way that turned heads without trying. Strong in her voice, certain in her movements. She was the kind of woman who walks into a room and seems to carry her own light with her, the kind who knows she belongs wherever she stands. People noticed her immediately. They listened when she spoke. They followed her lead without question. I admired her confidence even as it made me feel smaller. At first, I tried very hard to stay out of her way. I told myself that this was her home now, her family to shape, her place to claim. I spoke less, choosing my words carefully when I did speak at all. I smiled more than I felt, hoping warmth could cover any awkwardness. I did not want to become a shadow in their home, always present but never welcome. I wanted even less to become a problem, the kind people complain about behind closed doors. I watched her closely, not with suspicion, but with the careful attention of someone who does not want to cause harm. I learned her routines, her likes and dislikes, the small things that annoyed her and the things that made her laugh. I told myself that if I adjusted enough, if I made myself quiet enough, everything would settle into place. Families always take time, I thought. Love needs patience. But small things began to happen, things so ordinary on their own that I almost laughed at myself for noticing them. A glass would slip from someone's hand and shatter on the floor just as I stepped into the room. A light would flicker once or twice when I sat down to pray quietly in a corner. Someone would wake from a bad dream after I spoke about a worry I had been carrying. Each time, I brushed it away. Coincidences, I told myself. Life is full of them. When enough people live under one roof, strange timing is bound to happen. I did not understand then how fear works, how it collects moments like these and stacks them carefully until they look like proof. People do not like coincidences when they are afraid. They want reasons. They want something they can point to, something they can name. And when they cannot find a clear cause, they invent one. My daughter-in-law began to look at me differently, not all at once, but slowly, as if a question had taken root in her mind and would not let go. Her smiles grew thinner, stretched tight over thoughts she did not share. Her eyes lingered on me longer than before, watching my hands, my face, my movements, as if she expected something unusual to happen at any moment. When she spoke to me, her voice was polite, but there was an edge to it, a careful distance that had not been there before. Her questions changed too. They were no longer about recipes or routines. They became sharper, more direct. One evening, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, she looked at me with a seriousness that made my chest tighten. "Why do you always know when something bad will happen?" she asked. There was no accusation in her voice, but there was no warmth either. Just curiosity mixed with something colder. I did not know how to answer her. How do you explain that some hearts simply listen harder than others? That years of worry and loss train you to notice the smallest shifts, the way a person's voice changes before they speak bad news, the way the air feels before an argument begins. I wanted to tell her that I did not want to be right about these things, that I would have gladly traded all my instincts for a little more peace. But the words stayed inside me, heavy and tangled, and all I managed was a small shrug and a quiet response that did not satisfy her. After that, the space between us grew. It was subtle at first, easy to ignore if you were not looking closely. She no longer asked me to watch the children as often. She corrected me when I offered advice, even gently given. She sighed when I entered a room, not loudly enough to be rude, but not quietly enough to hide. I felt myself shrinking, my presence becoming something to manage rather than something to welcome. My son noticed, I think, but he did not know what to do. He loved us both in different ways, and that love pulled him in opposite directions. He grew quieter around me, careful with his words, as if afraid one wrong sentence might break something. I wanted to tell him that it was all right, that I understood, that I did not need defending. But even that felt like another burden to place on his shoulders. Looking back now, I can see how fear took its first steps in that house, how it learned to walk before anyone realized where it was headed. At the time, all I knew was that something gentle had begun to change into something sharp. I did not feel hated then. Not yet. I felt watched. Measured. And there is something deeply lonely about realizing that people are no longer seeing who you are, only what they are afraid you might be. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself that time would soften things, that once she knew me better, once she saw that I was just a tired mother trying to find her place, the tension would fade. I kept praying quietly. I kept cooking warm meals. I kept loving my son the only way I knew how, from a distance that grew a little wider each day. I did not know then that fear, once named, does not fade easily. I did not know that the smallest coincidences were already being woven into a story I could not control. All I knew was that before the names, before the whispers, before the word which ever touched my life, there was this moment, this slow beginning, where misunderstanding quietly took root and waited for the right time to grow.
The whispers did not arrive all at once. They grew slowly, the way weeds do in a garden no one is tending, quiet at first, almost unnoticeable, until one day you look around and realize they are everywhere. At the beginning, they were nothing more than glances exchanged across rooms, voices lowered when I entered, conversations that stopped too suddenly to feel natural. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was tired, that age makes you sensitive, that I should not read meaning into small things. But fear has a way of leaving fingerprints, and even before I could name it, I could feel it pressing into the shape of my days. It started with stories that seemed harmless enough when told alone. Someone lost money after ignoring a warning I had given them weeks before, and suddenly my quiet words were remembered not as concern, but as prediction. Someone fell sick after laughing off my advice to slow down and rest, and my care was twisted into something darker, something intentional. Someone argued with their spouse after mocking my prayers, and instead of seeing stress or misunderstanding for what it was, they connected it back to me, as if my whispered hopes had the power to bend their lives in cruel directions. Each moment on its own meant nothing. Together, they began to form a shape, and that shape frightened people. I noticed the change in how they spoke about me. My name came up more often, but rarely when I was present. When it did, it was followed by silence, the kind that feels heavy, loaded with meaning. I stopped being a woman who worried too much, a mother who cared deeply, a presence that could be ignored when inconvenient. I became something else entirely. I became a sign they tried to read, a warning they whispered about, a curse they blamed when life did what life has always done. It was as if fear needed a place to land, and I happened to be standing there. The house itself began to feel different. Rooms that once felt warm grew tight and uncomfortable. Laughter sounded forced, as if people were afraid joy might tempt something bad to happen. I could sense the tension even when no one spoke, like a thin wire stretched too far, ready to snap. I moved through the space carefully, watching my steps, measuring my words, shrinking myself further and further in the hope that I might become invisible enough to stop the stories from growing. But fear does not shrink when you step back. It grows. My daughter-in-law changed the most. She stopped handing the children to me without hesitation. She no longer left them alone in the room with me for very long. When I held them, she watched my hands closely, her eyes following every small movement, as if she expected something terrible to happen if she looked away. I could feel her tension travel through my own body, making my arms stiff, my touch uncertain. The children sensed it too. They grew restless in my lap, confused by the unease they did not understand. Once, when she thought I was out of earshot, I heard her speak the words that finally gave shape to what I had been feeling. Ever since she moved in, nothing feels right, she said, her voice low but firm, as if she had finally reached a conclusion she had been circling for months. Those words struck me harder than any insult ever could. Not because they were cruel, but because they were final. In that moment, I understood that in her mind, I was no longer a person with a history. I was the reason things went wrong. I wanted to step into the room and tell her the truth. I wanted to tell her that nothing had felt right for me in years, long before I ever crossed the threshold of her home. That loss changes the way you see the world, that grief sharpens your senses and teaches you to notice storms before the clouds fully gather. I wanted to tell her that prayer is not magic, not a spell cast to control or harm, but hope with its eyes closed, a way to survive when you cannot fix what hurts. I wanted to tell her that I would have given anything to be wrong about the worries I voiced, that I took no comfort in being right when bad things happened. But fear does not listen. It never has. Fear only collects proof, bending every moment to fit the story it has already decided to tell. It takes coincidence and turns it into intention. It takes care and turns it into control. And once fear has chosen its villain, it guards that choice fiercely. My son stood in the middle of all this, and watching him struggle hurt me more than any whisper ever could. He grew quieter with each passing day, his shoulders carrying a weight he did not know how to set down. When his wife spoke, he listened. When I spoke, he listened too. But listening is not the same as acting, and love does not always give you the courage to choose a side. He became a wall between us, built not of anger, but of confusion and divided loyalty. He did not defend me openly, but he did not accuse me either. He hovered in that painful space where silence feels safer than truth. There were moments when I caught him watching me, his eyes filled with questions he was afraid to ask. In those moments, I wanted to reach out and tell him it was all right, that I did not blame him, that he did not have to protect me. But a mother knows when her words might only add to the burden her child already carries. So I stayed quiet. I let him keep his distance. I carried my hurt alone. That hurt was different from anger. Anger burns hot and loud, demanding release. This was colder, deeper. It settled into me slowly, filling the spaces where trust had once lived. Being feared is painful, but being doubted by the child you raised cuts deeper than fear ever could. I could have faced accusations. I could have faced open rejection. What I struggled with was the quiet uncertainty, the feeling of being half believed, half forgiven, never fully seen. As the days passed, the stories grew heavier, more confident. People spoke about me with a certainty that shocked me, as if they had always known who I was, as if my entire life could be reduced to a handful of moments viewed through the lens of fear. I listened to those stories from the outside, trapped in a version of myself I did not recognize. And with each one, I felt myself slipping further away from the woman I used to be, becoming instead the shape they needed me to fill. I learned then how quickly fear can turn love into suspicion, how easily care can be mistaken for control, how fragile belonging truly is. I learned that once a story takes hold, the truth becomes quiet, almost invisible. And I learned that the deepest wounds are not always made by harsh words or open cruelty, but by silence, distance, and the slow realization that the people you love no longer trust the heart you have always offered them. That was when the conflict truly began, not with shouting or confrontation, but with stories told in whispers, with fear passed hand to hand, growing heavier each time it was shared. And I stood at the center of it, watching my place in that family shift from mother to mystery, from comfort to caution, knowing deep inside that once fear has found its voice, it rarely stops speaking on its own. The night everything changed did not begin with shouting or anger or any clear sign that it would matter more than all the nights before it. It began quietly, almost gently, the way the most important moments often do. The sky had been heavy all day, clouds pressing low as if the world itself was tired. By evening, the air felt thick, hard to breathe, and everyone moved a little slower, burdened by something they could not name. I remember thinking, as I washed the last cup in the sink, that the house felt restless, like it was waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the power went out. The lights blinked once, twice, and then disappeared completely, leaving the house swallowed by darkness so sudden it felt physical, like a curtain pulled tight over our eyes. The quiet shattered instantly. The children cried out in fear, their small voices rising sharp and panicked, cutting through the dark. The wind began to howl outside, slamming itself against the windows with a force that made the glass rattle in its frame. Somewhere beyond the walls, something fell with a loud, hollow crack, a sound that echoed through the night and settled deep in my bones. For a moment, no one moved. Darkness has a way of freezing people, of reminding them how little control they truly have. I could hear breathing all around me, quick and uneven, and my own heart began to race, not with fear, but with a strange sense of knowing. The kind that creeps in before words can form. Before anyone could speak, before someone reached for a flashlight or called out a name, the moment arrived. My daughter-in-law collapsed. It happened so fast that at first, my mind refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. One moment she was standing, tense and alert, her face pale in the faint light coming through the window. The next, her knees gave way, and she crumpled to the floor as if the strength had been pulled straight out of her body. Someone screamed, a sharp, broken sound that tore through the darkness, and then everything dissolved into chaos. Panic filled the room like smoke, thick and choking, stealing breath and clear thought. Voices overlapped, shouting her name, calling for help, crying out in confusion and terror. Feet shuffled blindly across the floor. Someone knocked into a chair, sending it crashing over. In the middle of it all, I heard my own name shouted, loud and desperate. Not in blame. Not in anger. But in fear. In that moment, something shifted. For the first time since the whispers began, since fear had wrapped itself around me like a second skin, they looked at me differently. In the dim light, faces turned toward me not with suspicion, but with hope. Raw, unguarded hope. It was as if the stories they had built about me fell away all at once, stripped bare by the urgency of the moment. I was no longer the witch they feared, the curse they whispered about. I was simply there. I was someone who might know what to do. I did not hesitate. There was no room left for hurt or pride or the quiet wounds I had been carrying. My body moved before my mind could catch up, guided by instinct sharpened through years of caring for others. I knelt beside her on the floor, my knees pressing into the cold surface, my hands trembling as I reached for her. Her skin felt clammy beneath my fingers, her breathing shallow and uneven. I could feel her fear, even unconscious, radiating from her like heat. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. My thoughts raced, but my hands stayed steady, doing what they could, grounding her, keeping her safe. And then I prayed. Not loudly. Not with dramatic words meant to impress or command. I prayed the way I always had, quietly, urgently, from a place deep inside me that had known desperation many times before. I asked for strength, for calm, for her to be spared from whatever weight had finally become too heavy for her to carry. Around me, the house seemed to hold its breath. The wind still howled outside, but inside, something softened. The panic did not disappear, but it changed shape, becoming focused, directed. Someone found a flashlight. Someone called for help. My son knelt on the other side of her, his face pale, his hands shaking as he held hers. I could feel his fear, sharp and raw, cutting through me, and for a moment, I was not the woman they had doubted. I was just his mother again, sharing his terror, carrying it with him. Time stretched in strange ways after that. Minutes felt like hours. Every breath she took felt like a victory. Every small movement brought a rush of relief followed by fear that it might stop again. When help finally arrived, when the world slowly began to make sense again, I stayed where I was, kneeling on the floor, my legs numb, my hands aching, my heart still racing. By morning, the worst had passed. The house was filled with soft light, pale and gentle, as if the night had never been so cruel. My daughter-in-law lay resting, her breathing steady, her face calmer than I had seen it in months. The doctor spoke quietly, his words simple and clear. Stress. Exhaustion. Too much fear carried for too long. Nothing mysterious. Nothing dark. Just a body pushed past its limits by a mind that could not find rest. No one said much after that. There were no speeches, no apologies spoken out loud. But nothing was the same. Because no one forgot that night. They could not forget the way fear had failed them when it mattered most. They could not forget how the stories they had told themselves fell apart in the face of real danger. They could not forget the moment when the woman they had been afraid of was the one kneeling on the floor, steady and present, offering not harm, but care. That night broke something open, not just in the house, but in the hearts of everyone inside it. It cracked the shell fear had built around me and exposed the truth beneath it. And though the silence that followed was heavy, it was no longer filled with whispers. It was filled with understanding, slow and uncertain, but real. I did not know then what would come next. I did not know how forgiveness would find its way into that space, or how trust would begin to grow again. All I knew was that the darkness had shown them something they could not unsee, and once fear is exposed for what it truly is, it loses its power to rule quietly in the shadows.